So hello everyone, in this video we are going to critically analyze Indian economy. Yes, you are right. This video is not about just criticizing the problems of Indian economy, but also we are going to discuss and we are going to do a critical analysis, advantages, disadvantages, what are the problem, what is the history, how throughout the Indian economy has developed. Okay, so let's begin with overall understanding what is the scenario today and what is it. Simple. Today if you see the picture of India, every institution in the world, every central bank in the world, and even Western countries and developed countries are actually holding India to be growing rapidly as well as showing impressive growth. How it is? Simple. If you see in world's all over largest economies, India lies fifth largest economy by nominal GDP. Also, in terms of purchasing power parity, we are the third largest. And apart from that, if you see, IMF as well as various other organizations have quoted 6% or maybe 7% growth rate of India, which actually guarantees that by the year of 2028, we are going to be the third largest economy. But this picture, which the Indian economy has been shown into different newspaper, in the news channel, seems to be just on paper. There are actually fundamental fractures in the Indian economy which we have to take into consideration. So let's dig deep into and understand more about Indian economy and what are the real problems all about. To understand that, we have to make it sure that is there is any possibility that India can become a super power, or maybe India can lead in terms of economy or not. And to understand that, we have to judge India on different parameters. So first thing we'll be looking at when we compare the per capita income, that is GDP per person, that is GDP per capita of 5 largest or 5 emerging economies in the world. So those are Russia, China, Brazil, Africa and India. If we compare them properly, we will understand that India is lagging really far behind of this all 5 emerging economies. Not only that, India has a very long way if it wants to become a superpower, as well as if it wants to lead in economy of all the emerging nations. Despite showing impressive growth, yes, India has been hailed by various organizations, various countries to be growing very fast. But all this growth India is showing, but still it lags behind its rival China. Okay, if you compare even the purchasing power parity, which is adjusted to gross domestic product, as well as if you look into GDP per capita, India is one of the lowest GDP per capita country in all the G7 and BRICS nation. And this will show you that, of course, when we compare Indian economy and when we even consider the factors like your PPP, the factors like GDP per capita, there are so much of improvements which Indian economy will require. Okay. Now, to just understand the whole history and journey of Indian economy, we have to do a comparative analysis. The comparative analysis of China and India, the feud which has gone beyond geopolitics as well as economy since 1940s. So let's first talk about 1988, where GDP, that is nominal GDP of both the country, was almost same, but China slightly grew in 1990s. In 2023, China GDP is 4.74 times higher than India. So from this, we can understand that yes, both the countries started on the same footing, but yes, China gone much more further. China crossed its 1 trillion in 1998, and after almost 9 years, we crossed 1 trillion mark. The other thing is, China is almost 4.8 times richer than India in nominal terms and 2.54 times richer in your purchasing power method. Other than that, if you look at the per capita ranking, China is much more ahead in terms of per capita, GDP per capita rankings also, as well as purchasing power parity also. So here you could see India's rank and even China's rank. Now, if you do the comparative analysis of India and China, in 1980, India's gross domestic product was 64% of China. So China was even. In 1980s, this was the scenario, which was China was much more ahead than India. Then in 2001, China joined World Trade Organization. When China joined World Trade Organization, India's economy was only 28% of China's. That means from 64% of China in 1980s, in 2001, in the 20 years, we saw that Indian size was outgrown by China. Okay, so here India has not shrinked, but rather China has grown at a very fast pace. Next is, despite several years of rapid growth in 21st century, by 2021, Indian economy has fallen even further behind, and now it equals 17% of China. So now, even if you can look into RBI data, IMF's rankings, and even different percentage of growth which you see in your newspaper and your news channels, 7% growth, 6% growth, booming economy, largest market. But if you compare and if you look at the overall journey, we are just 17% of China. This is what your real picture of Indian economy lies. Okay. Other than that, if India's economy had matched China's growth over past 40 years, if whatever we are lagging behind, if we would have matched up with China in last 40 years, India's current GDP would have been 10 trillion instead of just 3.47 trillion. Even if we consider that we will be 5 trillion economy till 2030 or 2025 even, just being optimistic enough, then also we do understand that if last 40 years we would have been paced along with China, we would have been 10 trillion, which is much more higher and almost twice of what vision we are holding to become a 5 trillion economy. I hope you get it. So GDP of India and China over time, if you see from 1960s comparison, if you see here, China has actually outsmarted India in terms of growth in PPP as well as in per capita. Okay. Now, however, India has just surpassed China in one thing, and that thing is what we are good at: population. We have surpassed China in population, but still, even if we have surpassed China in population, till the year of 2030, we will not surpass China in the workforce. And what does it mean? It means that workforce is nothing but all that population who is either willing or maybe participating in your work. So it means that Indian economy is characterized by significant unemployment. That is why the reports are saying that no wonder India is good or maybe growing great in population. We have now even become top ranker by removing China from the first position. But still, in workforce, we cannot remove China because unemployment rate are much more higher. So here you could see working age population, India and China. So working age population, when we are looking at, yes, we are growing, but to match the workforce projections with China, it will require a lot of time. Now, when we look at the demographics of India and China, apart from other economic statistics, 50% of its population is below 25 years and more than 65% of population is below 35 years. Okay. Now, this is the strength of Indian economy as well as a weakness. Now, why I'm saying it? Because to have a demographic dividend is a different thing, and to reap the demographic dividend is different thing. I hope you understand what is the difference between both of these terms. Next, according to Center of Monitoring Indian Economy, an independent think tank, India's unemployment rate was more than 7% for most of 2021 and 2022 and reached 7.9% in December 2022. Okay, this is much higher than global average and all the emerging economies. So what it means is that in India, whatever workforce is there, okay, this workforce is not as matching as the Chinese economy, in spite we are having a really good demographic dividend. So reaping of the demographic dividend, it is also because of the unskilling of the population. It is also because of the scarcity of resources, opportunities. It is also because of the poor infrastructure and most important, unemployment. All these factors bring us to a conclusion that unemployment rate is worst according to ILO. If you see, India's unemployment rate has been 40% or 41% now, which is very, very poor. In last 6 years, we have lost almost more than 7% of our employment rate. Okay. Then when we talk about our contribution of female labor force, now why we are talking about? We all would be knowing about periodic labor force survey. So periodic labor force our survey says that India has almost lost 7 to 8% of unemployment in last 6 years. But the same PLFS survey also says that a rise of female employment rate to the male level would provide 235 million workforce extra in the Indian employment. This is more than which European Union would be having. So in this way, India can try to improve its employment by adding more female workforce in the total workforce. The other thing is, now what are the main problems which Indian economy is facing? We have done the comparison between India and China. Now let us look at what are the problems. First is unemployment, which we already talked about. Unskilled workers, disguised unemployment. What do you mean by disguised unemployment? We all know about. Okay. So if to do a optimum work, 2 people are required. In India, 4 people are working on the same work. Okay. So therefore, it doesn't make a work productive. Then OECD has found that over 30% of people aged 15 to 29 in India are not unemployed, and the main reason for that is unskilled workforce, lack of education and training. Then connected to that only, of course, poor education standards. So 50% of Indian women are illiterate. Okay. Other than that, if you see lack of market oriented training, which even can be substantiated with a mass engineering unemployment rates which we see in India, syllabus mismatch with the job market, and the limits. This limits the economic development. So we are having growth, but along with the growth, we are having unemployment. Other than that, weakness in the private investment and policy uncertainty are also some of the weaknesses of Indian economy. Next, poor infrastructure is what is also responsible. So lack of basic amenities, or 40% of Indian fruit rots before coming to the Indian market, and agriculture being a huge driver of the GDP. Considering this also shows how poor the infrastructure is. Balance of payment deterioration. Now this may be because of your deficits. So India has large amount of foreign currency reserves. The high rates of economic growth have been at the cost of persistent current account deficit. Okay. Now one more additional thing is that the current account deficit in last 1-2 years have been dropped from 3.6% to 1%. So it has been reduced. But the problem is that India is having threefold problems. First is current account deficit. Second is fiscal deficit, which again increases debt. And third is your FDI, which is reducing. Now many of the people will think, sir, what are you talking about? The FDI is increasing in India, looking at India as an very like one of the nations which will be having largest markets, and the overall growth percentage is 7%. If you compare it with all the other countries, of course India is growing very fast, so FDI will be increasing. But if you compare it with the rates, so in 2008, okay, after 2008, if you compare the FDI has significantly dropped. In 2008 it was almost 4 to 5%, which today in 2023 it has dropped to 1.4% only, which we expect to be at 6%. But that FDI is not what we are getting right now. Okay. Next thing is Indian economy has still seen imports grow faster than exports. This again results into your trade deficit, which will again take a toll on your forex reserves. Okay. Other than that, high levels of private debt. Okay, I already talked about. So amount of lending in India has grown 30% past year. This is also because of your fiscal deficit. Okay. However, there are concerns about risk of loans. If you see India, various reports also say, for example, IMF warns India on debt concerns, says that it may exceed 100% of the GDP. So last 6 months it was almost more than 80%, and now IMF is also warning that this debt may go to 100% of GDP. Now if you compare it with the rest of the nations, it's 120% for some of the even developed countries. But still, this debt is a concern. We cannot just compare it with anyone. So large budgetary deficit is also responsible for such debt. So excluding subsidies, almost 8%. It amounts nearly 8% of GDP. It also allows a little scope for increasing investment in public services like health and education. and this is how your crowding out effect on private investment happens, because most of the public services are then forced to contribute in health and education sector. India also manages to collect 12% of GDP in tax, making it one of the lowest in world. So this is also a huge problem. The main problem now is government debt in terms of percentage of GDP, which in India, if you see, it's much more higher. So debt is much more higher when you compare it with other emerging economies. Then rising oil prices have always affected India, because India is a net importer of oil. If you compare of all the developing countries, India's rank would be in top 5 in terms of importing oil. And considering the fluctuations in oil prices, we will definitely suffer on this point also. So high prices in oil, for example, in 2021 and 2022, they worsen India's current account deficit and put upward pressure on consumer prices. This also affects the overall inflation. Okay, and that's why, in spite of growth, we also are feeling the heat of inflation in various products around the sectors. Then the strengths of Indian economy. Now we all talked about the fundamental fractures and what are the things which we need to improve. What are the strengths? So strengths, demographics of India. So we are having demographic dividend, but how to actually reap it? By skilling, by providing good health, by providing good education, okay, by providing market oriented technical skills, training. This is how you can improve your demographics. Comparative advantage in labor intensive industries. So India will benefit from the liberalization of free trade in recent year, attracting more FDI, okay, as CAD is already decreasing. Then remittances, it will always help, okay, remittances, and growth in trade Indian exports have grown from. So here is the India's top exports. If India concentrates more on exporting and improving its number in exports, this will again actually reduce the deficits which are there related to trade. So these are all the positive points related to India. Despite 2022 setback due to higher oil prices, we have seen good signs in Indian inflation, as RBI is proactive enough to control the inflation. So this was all about the session today. So here in this session we understood what is the overall picture or scenario of Indian economy, comparison with India and China economy, third is problems associated, and fourth is what are the positives. So overall, I think now you get a reality picture of Indian economy. Thank you very much and see you next time.